Hi, I'm Nate Morehouse. I'm an associate professor in biological sciences here at the University of Cincinnati, and I also direct a research institute called the Institute for Research in Sensing, or IRIS. So I run a research team here at UC that's focused on understanding animal vision and visual communication, typically in insects and spiders, although we've worked on penguins and snakes and lizards and a variety of other animals. There's a variety of ways in which the work that we do is connected to philosophy. I mean, one obvious example is that we study how animals see color. And color presents a number of philosophical conundrums, even when thinking about it for humans. Is color a property of objects? Is color something that is invented by the mind? Or does color emerge as something of a coevolutionary collaboration between the senses that sense it and the things that those senses are sensing? So we're oftentimes thinking about that. Scientists oftentimes aren't troubled by these kinds of questions, so they adopt one of these philosophical viewpoints without even really inspecting it for whether or not they think that that's the best way to consider color. So color is a great example of a larger area that overlaps between our work and philosophy, which has to do with perception, human perception, and also our interrogation into animal perception, which provokes certain kinds of questions about classical ways of thinking about human perception, the quote unquote umwelt of humans and animals, and what it is to have subjective experience. Do we have a way of understanding what it is like to be a bat or a jumping spider, or is that always and forever inaccessible to us? These are really perennially interesting philosophical questions that we're also thinking about in the process of doing our own work. Well, there's a couple of foundations to the work that we do that are really critical to consider. The first is that a lot of the communication we think about comes in the context of courtship. This is if you're looking for communication that is bombastic or flamboyant or elaborate, courtship between males and females is oftentimes a great place to look. And those kinds of outlandish traits troubled Darwin greatly because they seem to fly in the face of natural selection. And so a foundational text for understanding this was his grappling with that and attempting to solve that with something called sexual selection theory in his second most famous book called The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. Great read, full of really interesting ideas about how that might work. Of course, we're also very interested in the animal senses, and our understanding of the senses that animals use to navigate the world has been something built over very long periods of time. A key figure more recently has been someone named John Endler, who's really helped us to connect the dots between how the animal senses evolve in relationship to the environments and tasks that they are up against in the daily lives of animals, and how that should influence the kinds of communication traits that evolve to stimulate those changing sensory systems. This is a concept called sensory drive that really helps us to understand why the variety of sensory experiences that animals inhabit have evolved and how communication systems that they use to transfer information or make choices in their lives might have evolved alongside that. Well, I've always been interested in vision, and I've for a long time also had a personal practice of photography, which is also a form of visual noticing that I find to be really enriching. But I'm also a musician. I've been a professional musician through stretches of my past in touring bands, etc. And that for me has slowly evolved into an interest in sound studies and sound art and field recordings. That's something that's emerged as a real personal interest of mine over the past few years and is starting to actually weave into my professional life, which is lovely. It's another form of noticing, but it's a form of listening, noticing to the world around that really changes the way that you might experience something if you downgrade your seeing part to your upgrade your listening part. I'll be co-leading a study abroad course in May where My co-lead, Dr. Zanotti, and I will be taking a group of students to the Brazilian Amazon to live in community with the Mabenacre Kayapo community. And we'll be bringing with us a bunch of sound recording equipment so that students can learn about, explore, record, and understand the really incredible soundscapes, dawn choruses, all sorts of animals communicating, the sounds of human life in this really immersive environment that we'll be in. So I'm excited to have those worlds colliding a little bit for me. So I oftentimes get asked because the work that I do might be called quote unquote curiosity driven science. Doesn't seem to have a clear, direct technological benefits. And there are a variety of ways of answering this. People are oftentimes wanting to know how the work that I do might solve valuable human problems. And there are good questions to approach with that. For example, small animal eyes oftentimes present really excellent blueprints for novel camera or sensor technologies. And as a matter of fact, there is a camera on the Mars rover taking pictures of the surface of Mars right now that was inspired by some of the unusual ways in which jumping spiders, one of the animal groups that we study intensively, go about seeing the world. So that's an important translational opportunity between the capabilities of animal vision and our needs to develop lower cost, higher quality, higher performance visual sensors or optical sensors. Another area that we are oftentimes in conversation has to do with the fact that many of these small animals need to make split-second decisions about where to go, what to do, who to eat, who to avoid, using an enormous amount of information coming in through their eyes, but processing it with a very small brain. And this kind of challenge is showing up over and over again now in autonomous vehicle guidance systems, where the first generation of self-driving cars were moving through the world with extremely expensive liquid-cooled supercomputers in the trunk. Obviously not a scalable solution because of the cost and the fragility of the system. So we're always looking for clever ways of downsampling the enormous amount of information that those vehicles, much like a jumping spider, are needing to deal with to make split-second intelligent decisions. There's another way that I like to answer this question, which has to do with human curiosity, though. Oftentimes, when people say curiosity-driven science, they mean it to belittle or make something appear childlike. And actually, oftentimes we relegate curiosity to childhood. But I think there's so much evidence coming out now that mental health and physical well-being of people is really dependent on retaining that kind of curiosity in the world. And in fact, I think curiosity is a fundamental touchstone for what it means to be human. So I'm not swift to denigrate that. I actually think that part of what my role is in the world and my research team's role is to remind us to be curious, remind us that there is still magic and mystery even in the backyard. People also wonder where the stories come from that David Attenborough talks about, for example, but they don't realize that it's teams of people like ours that are generating those stories by being curious in the natural world, following threads of interest and intuition and evidence into these stories in the undergrowth, for example. We are one of the teams that provides the stories to natural history filmmaking. And as a matter of fact, more and more we're engaging with the BBC Natural History Unit, for example, and helping to provide them with expertise, stories, research for their programming. When I was evaluating coming to the University of Cincinnati, I actually paid attention to the philosophy department as part of that decision. Philosophy departments oftentimes contain people that are thinking really deeply and provocatively about current questions in science. And I was really pleased to see the depth of interest and expertise here in the philosophy department, in philosophy of science, including philosophy of life sciences, philosophy of mind. It's not just a single faculty member that holds all of these expertises. It's a group of really vibrant and interesting individuals from Tony Shamero to Angela Potocznik to Zvi Biener. All of these people and more are really thinking deeply about important questions that are adjacent or overlapping with our work. Peter Langland Hassan with his work in philosophy of cognition and philosophy of the mind. So what I saw initially as being opportunity has really turned into collaboration, friendship, and richness for me and my students, and also for students in the philosophy department that sometimes choose to spend their Fridays in my research team meeting. That's happened repeatedly since I arrived here, and that's been a lovely cross-pollination between perspectives. So, my favorite course in undergrad, which is a hard choice, I have to say, because I was very adventurous in the courses that I took. My favorite was probably the insect physiology course that I took with Cole Gilbert. He was a real mentor of mine at the time. The lab was fascinating. We recorded from the nervous systems of all sorts of insects and all sorts of contexts. It was really rich with information, rich with story, and also rich with experience, hands-on experience. So I loved that course. I did take a philosophy of the mind course as an undergrad, which I loved the challenge of the questions posed in that class. And then, of course, photography and postmodern fiction and art history alongside my biology curricula. So it was all wonderful. As a graduate student, I didn't take much coursework, actually. The program that I was in was pretty light on course requirements, but I do remember loving taking courses in the mathematics department, including one on game theory. Again, I love these puzzles and trying my mind against puzzles. That's part of what science is about for me, is finding worthy puzzles that have yet to be satisfactorily solved by others, and then pushing my imagination and my mind and my logic against them to see how far I can advance our understanding of something. And game theory was a whole area that I hadn't done that yet in, and that was loads of fun. So I really enjoyed that course. Even though we were staying at a pretty basic Nash equilibrium level, it was a delight to have such a fun set of mental puzzles to work with. Well, I've oftentimes thought about plan Bs, and I think it's actually really healthy to think about plan Bs because there are moments in any kind of career, especially one that it can be as challenging, discouraging sometimes when you get rejection for some grant that you were very fond of or a manuscript you really thought was going to go in one place, to have a chance to escape into imagination and have plausible alternatives for what you might do. So for me, plan Bs have oftentimes been around artistic practice, photography and music being the predominant ones. That imagining of a life in those lanes started very early for me. I can remember telling my parents at 13, I left my bed to come down to tell them that I was going to drop out of school and move to New York City to start a career in jazz. Because I was reading Miles Davis's autobiography at the time, and that's what he did. And they were very kind in putting me back to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning. But I've oftentimes thought about those. The other thing that I've actually really seriously considered is starting a second career thinking about spices. Spices are a fascinating interface between human history, both the good and bad sides of human history, and human culture and the natural world. They're oftentimes made out of roots or nuts or flowers or leaves. So there's a really fascinating botany and biology to the spices that we oftentimes use. But there's this rich, deep human cultural history to them as well. And I'm also synesthetic. So smells and tastes have very strong color perceptions for me. So I love being in a spice shop. So I actually even built out a whole business plan when I was really seriously considering exiting stage left from academia into the spice trade. But I would love that. It would have the educational side of things. It would have the biology side of things. It would have the human cultural side of things. And so that has remained mostly in my kitchen, but it's fun to dream. So I hate these favorite questions because I don't rank things. That's not how my mind works. But I have to say that probably Rilke is going to be very high on the list there across all of those categories. Poet, philosopher, thinker, scientist, just a deeply curious and intelligent human being. Rilke shows up in my life over and over again across the range of things that I tend to be interested in too. My protests to favorite questions will be to offer a variety of things. So I love making music with friends. It's something that I've always loved to do and I have returned to doing in this chapter of my life. And so that's a delight. I also love to cook. Saturday or Sunday afternoons spent hands in ingredients, making some kind of feast for friends and loved ones is a real pleasure for me. So those are two really obvious things. The last thing I'll say is that I love full body movement, whether it's running or dancing or swimming. And so oftentimes, if I'm not making music with friends, cooking, I'll be running or dancing in some kind of way outside of work. So those are all things that I absolutely love to do. Well, two things come to mind. I am quite fond of speculative fiction or fantasy or forms of creative expression that spring us from the constrictions of quote unquote reality. So some of my favorites recently have been a Susanna Clark novel called Piranesi, just absolutely astonishing world that she builds in that. And I was actually really recently reminded of my long-term love of Guillermo del Toro. I've just watched Frankenstein, fantastic, visceral movie, really excellent rendition of that story in a particularly del Toro way. But I'm very fond of his early work. Of course, Pan's Labyrinth, but also The Devil's Backbone, for example. And so early Guillermo del Toro would come up as an obvious favorite for me.